Good evening, everyone. I hope that you've had a good week. I hope that you're finding this material that my mom, Linda, and I have been teaching you. I hope you're finding it valuable. I hope it's giving you some tools and some pieces that are helping to make your life and your mental health much, much better. That's my prayer. Tonight, we're going to talk about obsessive thoughts and what if thinking. Obsessive thoughts and what if thinking. I think the way we're going to start this tonight, facilitators, I'm going to give a little bit of an intro and then I'm going to have you pause. And as a group, I'm going to have you build a list, okay? So we're going to start tonight with obsessive thoughts. So obsessive thinking, obsessive thoughts. I don't know how many of you have experienced periods of your life or seasons where you would say you are in obsessive thinking. We can think of obsessive thinking as obsession, right? You meet this person, a friend, or a potential girlfriend, boyfriend, potential spouse, and you find yourself thinking about them 24/7, right? That's a normal process, especially in that beginning and dating. I mean, it's totally normal that when two people fall in love, they're thinking about each other a ton, right? That we see that. That's normal. Something actually is happening in the body and they can't think about anybody else. When does it become a problem? Well, it becomes a problem if the other person doesn't share that, right? Or if the obsessive thinking gets so bad that it's interrupting what you're able to do and your normal productivity, and you can't think about anything else but that person, okay? So we can be obsessive about a person. We can get into obsessive thinking about anything. Am I going to get that job? I applied for that job. That's all you're thinking about. That's all you're thinking about. That's all you're thinking about. We can get in those spaces. Extreme cases of obsessive thinking. I would say most of us at some point in our lives have some obsessive thinking patterns over different things. I've seen people obsessed over things, right? Or over a movie, or over an actor or an actress, or over a band, right? A kid listens to that band all the time. They read every possible article they can. They research them all the time on the internet. They try to go to the concert, right? So you can see these tendencies happen when it gets, and they can get problematic even in that space, but they can also become really extreme. And really extreme would be, I would say, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And that's a situation where you've got someone that has to wash their hands 10 times before leaving the bathroom, or they walk into a room and there's tiles and they have to count all the tiles in the room before they go, or before they cross the threshold, they have to tap the door 10 times, take a step back, there can be all of these kinds of routines. I am not going to dig into obsessive compulsive disorder tonight. I just want to talk about what the majority of us experience. And I would say to you, if you experience obsessive compulsive disorder, please don't experience that alone. I really want to encourage you to go see a therapist and get some help, at least someone at the bare minimum that you can talk to who would understand what you're experiencing, okay? But obsessive thinking. So I want to share a couple of stories. I remember a time in my life where I became obsessed. I was in high school. You might think this is a funny, silly story, but it was really real. I became obsessed with the Judds. I don't know if you remember the country duo, the Judds. It was my junior and senior year of high school, and I just became obsessed with them. I was an athlete. I was a really great student. I poured my life into those two things, and in my free spaces, I had all the Judds albums. I researched articles. This is before the internet, right? So I'd go to the library and I'd research old articles, and But when I look back, and I mean, somebody, if they had really dug deep and understood how intense that was for me, they might go, oh, well, something was off there. In that space for me, that obsession was actually helping me survive a very difficult period in my home. My junior and senior year at school was phenomenal. That's where I spent most of my time. But my parents were having a really hard time at home, and my sister was having a really hard time with some things. And home was just a really difficult space. And I really believe that obsession at that period in my time, it was my outlet. It was my outlet. So my outlets were sports and band and academics and my relationships that went with all of that. And then in my free time, I would disappear into the jets. I think we see that with kids today. They disappear into different things that they become obsessed with. And I really think it's a coping mechanism. Knowing what I know today, if I were to go back into my former self, I wouldn't be critical of what happened with me then. I really think it was helping me survive a difficult period in my life. Okay, so sometimes obsessive periods can actually serve us well, if that makes sense. I've definitely had periods in my life where I get these tapes rolling and they just keep rolling and rolling and I can't get these thoughts, I can't get out of train of thought. I've had those periods in my life. Obsessive thinking can also get to be scary. So it cannot just be obsessive in nature, but it can be scary in nature. So just another weird story. And I'm trying to be really vulnerable with you guys because sometimes we don't talk about these things. We don't talk about these things, so we think we're the only one. I was sitting one time at a table, all ministers around the table. And one of the ministers began to talk about a period in his life when life was really dark and he was depressed and he didn't feel like he could talk to anybody. And he said, I was scared to get on the highway because every time I get on the highway, what would continually run through my mind is I could jerk the wheel into a semi and I could end it all. I remember sitting there that day, and then another lady at the table who was a minister, she said, oh, thank you for sharing that. She said, I went through a period where I was on the edge of suicide. And she said, one night I was terrified I was going to commit suicide, and I called my husband, who was a trucker who was on the road, and I said to him, I'm about to do something, I need help. And he called some people who came in and intervened. And I sat there at that table that day. Here are people that, this one gentleman's 30 some years older than me, this woman 20 some years older than me at this time in my life. I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, that is so helpful to know. That is so profoundly helpful to know that you two people who I see as leaders in the community, spiritual leaders in the community, these two people who I just, in my mind, they're up here, right? That you too have had deep, dark, mental, emotional struggles. We don't share these things enough. We hide them. And the person sitting to us is struggling. And it's just important that we're willing to share our own scary stories. So anyway, this again was, I just can't tell you how difficult the period was for me after my parents' divorce. Again, I was 23 when that happened. It was a very difficult period. And it was also, again, as I told you earlier, it was a period in my life where I was living by myself for the first time ever, first time that I was full-time employment out of school. So a lot of things going on, right? But I was visiting my dad out in Colorado, and I was supposed to fly to Houston the next day for my work. And my dad said to me that night, he's like, hey, will you watch this movie with me? And I'm like, he's like, he loved the movie for some reason. And the movie was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So there's two things I didn't know as we went into the movie. One, I didn't realize it was rated R, which I'm very careful about rated R because I do not do well with disturbing images. I do not do well with scary. It literally hangs with me for 3 or 4 days. It messes with me. I don't want anything to do with it. So first of all, it was a horror flick, and I didn't realize that, and it was rated R. But so I didn't know that going in, right? And so I think I was like maybe 25, 26, and I watched this movie with my dad, and it horrified me to my core. Okay, it horrified me to my core. And so we turned off the movie. We're at my in-laws, or my brother and his wife's house. Dad goes to bed. I lay down, and I would tell you, it was probably a panic attack that happened. And I laid there. Maybe it wasn't a panic attack. I don't know what the true definition would be, but my mind kicked into fear. And irrational fear, right? Completely irrational, didn't make sense, but I couldn't stop the tapes. And at one point in the night, I literally was afraid that I might, this is the only time I've ever experienced this, but I was literally afraid that I might get up and get a knife and stab somebody, right? Obsessive, scary. I got through the night. I don't think I slept a wink. It continued to disturb me the whole next day. Actually, it didn't. I got on the plane and I couldn't get it to go away. And so I did a technique. I'm just going to throw this in here. I did a technique that is used in Christian circles. And you might try this technique. So this particular scene in the movie just kept replaying, and I was just horrified by it. And so the technique is this. You go back in and you imagine the scene, whether it's something you watched in a movie or in real life. And before the horrific thing happens, you imagine Jesus stepping in to the story, into the picture, and protecting you or stopping what's about to happen. You literally kind of change the memory. And then you reflect on that. Every time you play the story, you see Jesus protecting, saving, guarding. And it completely can change a memory. I did that on the airplane, and I finally found relief. So that's a powerful technique. There's actually a psychologist who developed that and has quite a couple books on that. And I know people who have changed their lives using that technique. But it gave me relief that day. There are people who say, every once in a while I'll get really panicked and I'm afraid I'm going to kill somebody, or I'm afraid I'm going to kill myself, or I'm afraid I'm going to jump off a cliff, or I'm afraid I'm going to crawl up on my house and jump off the side of the house, or I'm afraid I'm going to do something really, really terrible, right? And these are good, wonderful people that are just dealing with an obsessive process in the brain, okay? So right now, facilitator, in just a second, I'm going to have you pause the video. And this is what I want you to do. I want you to build a list of different ways obsessive thinking can happen for you. So let me give you an example. Obsessive thinking, you're thinking about worst case scenario. Right? Why do we do that? Why do we always play out the worst case scenario? I'm thinking about taking my kids to the beach, and now I'm like, all I can think about is what if they drown, right? Instead of what if we're careful and we have the best day ever, right? So we tend to play out worst case scenarios. So I'm facilitator, pause the video, build a list, and then turn it back on. So I hope you were able to build a list, kind of think through this as a group for a moment. This is a list of obsessive thoughts, patterns that I actually built in one of my classes. So a group of my leaders actually built this list. So we're just going to run through this real quickly. Again, we said worst case scenarios. Replaying flashbacks. So something actually very bad happened in your life, and you just keep replaying it, keep reliving it. One of the things you need to understand when you do that, not only is your mind replaying it, but your body's reliving it, right? And you're feeling it through your whole body. So it's a physical thing as well as a mental thing. You just keep playing it. And then you've got the fear of what if it happens again, right? Like worst case scenario, you think about all the bad things that could happen. Negative thinking can become very obsessive. All your thoughts are negative. And our tendency is, as human beings, guys, if you look into the research, our tendency is to think negative thoughts. We all think a ton of negative thoughts every day. So this is our natural tendency as human beings. They say the reason that that news likes to focus on negative thinking versus positive things in the world is that the negative thinking actually gives you a kick of serotonin in the brain, and so people feed off of negative news and negative stories. My propensity is toward, I tend to be a very positive person, and I hate this one. Obsessiveness, as a story I shared earlier, you can get into a place where you're having thoughts of self-harm or harming others. And your thoughts can get very, very, very dark. I would guess some of your darkest thoughts, others of us have had dark thoughts. I mean, we don't tend to share our darkest thoughts, right? Because they're really creepy, and you're like, oh my gosh, why did I think that? That's terrible. I'm not going to tell anybody that, right? So we never tell anybody, and so you're the one that has the dark thoughts, and nobody else has ever told you had a dark thought, so you think you're the only one, right? Obsessive thinking can be, I can't think about anything but that person or that band or that group. And obsessiveness can then go into behavior, right? So all I want to do is whatever that one thing is, right? For a kid, maybe it's all I want to do is play video games. I read an article just yesterday about a young man in the UK who, during his first 2 years of college, he was supposed to be in college, but he literally was living 18 hours a day in a video game. One of those video games where, you have an avatar and you're actually doing things and commanding people, and there's people on the internet all around. He became a hero worldwide in this video game, but he was spending 18 hours a day. No real life. It was all this other world. Okay? All right, so what do we do with this? What do we do with this? So I'm going to erase this list so I can use the board. Here's a few things I want you to know, okay? And then I'm going to give you a tool for obsessive thinking. Number one, obsessive thought patterns are habits, okay? It's a habit. Now, I'm not telling you that there aren't some things, I don't know if habit has two B's or not. I'm not going to tell you that there may not be some things going on in your chemical brain that aren't making this worse, because it could be, okay? Which is why I spent so much time on the food session, you understanding that there are certain things you can give your body to help shut some of this down. So but it's also a habit, okay? It's a habit. And we can learn to take control of our mind and our thinking. We really can. And it takes effort, but it can be done. So understanding that thought patterns are habits. And so you have to make a decision, and the decision is, I want to make some new habits. Oops. I want to make some new habits, okay? For those of you, if I have spelled habits wrong, I apologize if it's driving you nuts, okay? So one thing that you could do to create a new habit is you could ask some questions, okay? One of the questions you could ask, what is this obsessive line of thinking? What is it really about? So ask that question. You can ask the question, why am I doing this? What are you getting out of it? Is there something positive you're getting out of this? So when you become obsessed with a person, I've done some research around that, and they say that it actually creates a dopamine hit, and it becomes a habit. So maybe you had one or two great experiences with that person, and it released all of these endorphins and all of these positive chemicals in your mind, right? So you're chasing that experience again. You're chasing what happened in your body. You're trying to have it happen again. So you're actually chasing something addictive. Isn't that fascinating? So why am I doing this? And my last question, what I just said, what am I getting out of it? Okay? Depending on the obsessive thinking pattern that you're experiencing, this could be a really good process, and it could be really helpful to do this with someone else. So I'm sure my mom has said it. I'm going to say it multiple times. I'm a big proponent of counselors. I've been to counseling more than once in my life, even with all my natural tools and everything I've got here. There are times I've gone to counselors because I knew I needed someone else who knew more to help me process what was going on in my mind and in my body. Here's the truth, okay? If you've grown up experiencing poverty, and if you've had incidences with the court system and you've been mandated to go see a counselor at different periods in your life, you probably haven't had positive counseling experience, right? You're like, yeah, I had to go and they were a jerk and da-da-da-da-da-da, right? I'm sorry that happened to you. But I also want to tell you that when you choose to go to a counselor and you get to pick your counselor, and I mean, you go with the attitude, if this one doesn't work, I'm going to go find someone else. It's a totally different experience because you're in charge. You're not there because you have to be, but you're in charge. And I just want to encourage you. Some of you may want to enter into some counseling. You may want to go get some help because it's really helped to process some of these things. If you can't afford a counselor, finding a minister that has a counseling license or that has really good experience and knowledge. But I just want you to know, both myself and my husband at multiple times in our life have gone and sought help when we needed to when we just needed help knowing what was going on. When my husband and I, before we got married, I had seen a couple of times where I observed my husband having an anxiety attack. Let me pause for a second. I don't know if this has been explained yet, but here's my difference between a panic attack and an anxiety attack. I think in my mind, a panic attack, your physical symptoms kick in, right? Suddenly the heart's racing, you're struggling to breathe, you're dizzy, right? So there are physical things happening to you. An anxiety attack, in my opinion, an anxiety attack is something's kicking in the brain, but maybe you're not having the physical symptoms. So before my husband and I, and it's short-lived, right? It's some bunch of irrational thought, and then it kind of subsides. It's like a storm came in, all of this stuff happened, and then it went on. So I had observed like 3 times since my husband and I got engaged that he was or before we got engaged, him having these anxiety attacks. And I just said to him one day, I said, I said, Tony, my dad had a lot of anxiety and depression, and he was never willing to go get counseling. And I said, I will marry you, but you have to promise me that if the anxiety gets too great or the depression gets too great, that you will go see a counselor. If I say at some point, I can't handle this, you got to go get help, that you will do it. He promised me that, and about 6 months into our marriage, there were just some moments that were just really intense for him with anxiety, and I said, you got to go. You got to go. And so he went to counseling, and it was very beneficial because she was a great counselor. She taught some of these things that we're teaching in this series to my husband. It was the first time anybody said, hey, you really can take the driver's wheel of your brain. You don't have to follow every lead that your brain gives you. You can take control, right? And you can take the thinking pattern in a different direction. And this is also when he did go on Lexapro for a few years. Neither my husband or I struggle with anxiety or depression very often. Occasionally we will for a couple days, something's going on. But for the most part, we've learned these patterns and learned how to take control. Okay. So I'm going to give you 2 more techniques, okay? So I've given you a few tools with obsessive thinking. I want to give you 2 more tools, okay? The first thing is when you have a thought and it's a negative thought, like I just said, take the driver's wheel. Don't just follow it. Don't just let your brain go and we're going to think about all the bad things that could happen and how awful it is. And the next thing you know, you are just in a mess. Okay? When that thought happens, guys, this is what you got to do. You got to stop. You got to stop. And you got to go, oh, that's a really nasty thought, or that's a bad thought, or right? Acknowledge the thought, and then you make a choice, okay? You can choose to follow that terrible rabbit trail that's going to make you miserable for the next 20 minutes, or however long you're going to follow that trail. Here's a phrase that I found really helpful, and I learned this from Lucinda Bassett and Midwest Center for Anxiety and Depression. Or you could say, it's just a thought. That's all it is, guys. It's just a thought. That's it. So you have a thought like I was in the middle of the night after, and I'm sure I was in full-blown anxiety attack, and I'm thinking, what if I go get a knife and I kill somebody? I was in a full-blown anxiety attack. It took a lot to bring me out of that, but I could have laid there and I could have just repeated, it's just a thought. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. I want you right now as a group, you facilitator, you don't need to pause, but just as a group, I want you to close your eyes right now. And I want you to say that phrase out loud. It's just a thought. I feel relief when I say that phrase, right? So you have a really scary thought go through your head. Pause. It's just a thought. That's it. It has no power. It can't do anything. It's not real. It's just a thought. So here's what I found will happen. If you can stay here, it's just a thought. And then go get busy doing something. Go clean a closet. Go on a walk. Go call your best friend, right? So that you can, you see, you're changing the habit. Because the habit often is we don't have our hands on the driver's wheel. We have a thought and we go into the whole thinking pattern. Grab the wheel. Say no. Stop. It's just a thought. It's just a thought. I'm not going to let my mind just go have a heyday with that thought. It's just a thought. Okay? I find this to have deep, profound impact. And it's the beginning of creating new habits around your thinking. Okay, everyone. So I want to wrap up this session with talking about what if thinking. Okay? So facilitator, why don't you pause the video and just for a moment as a class, what do you think what if thinking is? Okay. What if thinking is just simply that. It's when you think, what if, what if so-and-so never calls me back and I never see that person again? What if my daughter gets on the road and has a wreck tonight? What if I don't get that job? What if I get that job and I fail? What if? And the tendency is, guys, in what if thinking is we go to the most negative outcomes, okay? So we go to negative conclusions versus the positive. Happens all the time. Here's the truth. The vast majority of the time, our what if thinking, the negative, it never comes true, right? So we've just put our whole mind and our whole body through these worst case scenarios for nothing. For nothing. For nothing. Often better things happen than what we are thinking. again, what if thinking, just like obsessive thinking, is a habit. If we will stop the habit, put our hands on the wheel, and say, no, I'm going another direction. I'm not going to follow that rabbit trail. Okay? Another thing that you can do with what if thinking. So let's say your thought pattern is, what if I don't get that job? Right? What if I don't get that job and then I can't get paid and I can't feed my kids? And what if we lose our home? And what if? What if you took it the other direction? What if I do get that job? And what if it goes really well? And what if I really like it? And what if I get a raise? And what if I'm able to do more for my kids? And what if, learn to take it the positive direction. If you have time to do this in the class tonight, you might take a moment and follow a positive trail versus a negative trail in your thinking and feel what it does to your body. You physically feel better. You physically feel empowered. As I was doing that positive trail, what if I get a raise, whatever, all of a sudden I feel like, oh man, I can stand up straight. I can stand tall. There's possibilities. Good things are coming, right? And so that positive thinking does positive things to your entire body, and the negative thinking does negative things to your whole body, okay? So, guys, it's learning to take control. I'm going to give you a few final things that I want you to think about. So, recognize it's a habit, both obsessive and what if thinking. Learn to stop, take the wheel, say, I'm not going to go down that trail. I'm going to go a positive way, or I'm going to go do something so I don't keep doing this. Guys, you may have to do that 50 times a day in the beginning, 100 times in the beginning, if you're always thinking negative, all right? It's going to take some time to change your patterns, especially if they're really intense, okay? But just keep doing it. If you're like, oh, dang it, I'm following that trail again, that's okay. Just go, okay, I'm not going to do it. I'm going another direction. Okay, it takes time. Find somebody that you trust who will listen and won't judge you. Could be a pastor, could be a friend, could be a counselor, to help you as you're trying to develop new habits and you're trying to work through some of these things. The final tip that I want to give you tonight is gratitude. So I grew up at Scott City out in the country. My dad pastored a church out there, and there was a couple in our church that I just thought the world of. Wilfred and Louise were their names, and Wilfred and Louise were just really good to me and my family. And when I was in college, I believe, they retired from their farm and they moved into town, and they were in the process of building a new house. Building a new house is quite a venture. It's very, very stressful. You have a million decisions you've got to make. Often it costs more than you planned, and it can be a very stressful endeavor. And Wilfred and Louise were mentors to me when I was in high school. And one day during college, I came home and I was spending some time, and she shared this story with me. And she said, Deb, she said, we were at the house the other day, and she said, it's framed in. And she said, my anxiety was way up. She was like, I was thinking about, oh my gosh, what if we can't afford this? What if this and what if that? Anyway, Louise and Wilfred had deep, profound faith in God, very beautiful relationship with Jesus. And she said she felt like God just kind of jolted her and reminded her she needed to be thankful. And so Louise, she said, I stopped, and she said, I just closed my eyes and I started listing all the things that I have in my life, all the things I could be grateful for. Grateful that I had the money to build this house, grateful that the land that they got was right on the edge of town, so they could still have a field and see the sunset instead of a house blocking the sunset. Thankful for her children and her grandchildren, and thankful for Wilfred, her husband, thankful for her church, thankful for all of these amazing people that are in her world. And as she sat there and she just expressed the things she was grateful for, she said this anxiety just lifted off of her. It just vanished. And she was able to breathe, and she was able to walk away that night going, okay, even though this process is overwhelming, we're going to keep taking it one step at a time, and it's going to be okay. Gratitude is an amazing, amazing, amazing tool. I hope that the things that we've gone through tonight have been helpful to you. I hope that you will take some of them and start implementing them and practicing them in your life. If you haven't heard anything else tonight, please hear that your thought patterns are habits, and you can stop that habit, and you can create a new habit. Okay, it takes practice and work, but it can be done. I have one final thing that I am going to give you tonight. As we talked about in the night on food, and when we were talking about amino acids, there are 2 amino acids that can be really helpful with obsessive thinking, and I'm going to list those for you real quick. They are L-tyrosine. Get my notes so I spell it right. L-tyrosine, and I can't really say this one. L-phenylalanine. I'm not sure. Actually, in my research, I found out that somebody who is addicted to falling in love, or addicted to like romance novels and that whole process of that high you get when you're falling in love or a new experience with someone, that this one is often low in that person's brain chemistry, and this one can really help. So both of those you can get at a food store, you can get at Amazon, a health food store, I'm sorry, or Amazon. I would recommend you start out with, if you decide to try it, that you do a little bit of research, and I'd recommend you start out with a low amount and just observe. If it speeds up your body or makes you anxious, get off of it. But if it does begin to quiet your thoughts, it could be a really, really good tool for you if you really struggle with obsessive thinking. Guys, I hope tonight's been helpful. I will be seeing you soon. Thanks.